The wind was sharp that morning when Raffi walked out of the dome. The colony of Norvia was quiet, wrapped in a sheet of pale snow. The sky above shimmered with the cold blue light of the twin suns. Raffi pulled his coat tighter and watched the mist rise from the steel towers. It was a world where silence spoke louder than words. Raffi worked as a scout for the colony, a job that often kept him far from people. He liked the quiet and the open land. The frozen plains made him feel small yet free. He spent most of his days checking beacons, marking safe routes and mapping the changing terrain. But on that morning, something unusual happened. When he returned to the outpost, the signal board on his desk was blinking. It showed a symbol he had never seen before. The message had no sender, no coordinates, and no origin data. It was written in lines and curves that looked old and strange. He stared at the screen for several minutes, unsure what it meant. He called his friend Lena through the comms. She worked in the archive dome, where she translated old codes and messages from the first settlers. Her voice came through the static with a calm tone as always. She told him to send her a copy of the message. Raffi did, and she promised to check it. An hour later, Lena called back, her voice filled with quiet excitement. She said the markings matched something she had read in the restricted archives. They were part of an ancient legend about a figure known as the Wolf King, a warlord from the early days of human settlement. According to the story, the Wolf King led the first explorers through the northern forests and built a kingdom of machines and warriors. When his time came, he ordered his people to seal his body deep within a hidden tomb. It was said that the tomb would remain closed until someone worthy could awaken it again. Raffi listened in silence. He had heard fragments of that legend before, told by miners or travelers near the outpost. Most called it a myth made to scare children. But Lena sounded serious. She explained that no one had ever found proof of the tomb, though many had searched for it. Every expedition sent into the northern forests had failed to return. Raffi asked her why the message had reached him. She said she did not know. The colony network was secure, and such an old code could not appear without a source. She told him that maybe it was just a glitch, a system error, but she also knew Raffi well enough to guess what he was thinking. He looked out of the window. The northern horizon was a long white line under the blue suns. Something in him stirred, an old feeling that he could not explain. The forests had always called to him, though he had never crossed their edge. He told Lena he wanted to go north and see for himself. Lena tried to stop him. She reminded him that the last expedition to the northern forests had vanished. The land beyond the frozen plains was full of magnetic storms and strange energy fields. Even drones failed to map it. But Raffi only smiled. He said he would take careful steps, not chase myths. She sighed, but agreed to help him prepare. That evening, Raffi walked to the hangar where his small rover waited. The colony lights flickered as a solar storm passed above the clouds. The storm cut off the long-range scanners, which meant the northern lands were open and unobserved. It was the perfect time to travel quietly. He met 3 people who agreed to join him. The first was Lena, who decided she could not let him go alone. She was brave in her own way and had a mind sharp as glass. The second was Nilo, a tracker who knew how to read terrain and weather better than any machine. The third was Mira, a quiet engineer who fixed the colony's power systems. She had once worked on old military machines and knew how to handle unknown tech. They gathered their supplies, checked the rover, and loaded their energy cells. Raffi made sure each person understood the risk. The northern forests were uncharted, full of unknown structures and energy readings. But none of them turned back. Each had their reason to go. Lena wanted to uncover truth, Nilo wanted to test his skill, and Mira wanted to see what kind of machine still lived there. By nightfall, the group was ready. The wind was colder now, and the aurora stretched across the sky like a moving river. The colony gates opened slowly, and the rover's engines hummed in the snow. Raffi looked back one last time at the glowing domes before turning north. The first part of their journey was smooth. The plains stretched endless, covered in frost that reflected the light of the suns. They passed the remains of old towers, built long ago by settlers who had failed to survive. The machines there were buried under ice, their lights long gone. Mira took notes and scanned each wreck, trying to learn how the machines had lasted so long in the cold. After 2 days, the weather turned rough. A snowstorm rose from the east and the wind screamed like a living thing. They had to stop and take shelter near an old relay station half buried in the snow. Inside, they found rusted panels, broken screens, and walls covered in strange claw marks. Nilo studied the marks and said they were not made by tools or human hands. Raffi said nothing. He looked at the marks and thought of the legend. When the storm passed, they moved again. The snow grew deeper, and the land began to rise in slow hills. The air was full of static, and their compasses spun without direction. Mira used her scanner to fix their route by the pulse of old power lines buried under the ground. She said the readings matched patterns of human construction. That meant they were near something built long ago. On the 5th day, they saw the first trees of the northern forests. At first, they looked like stone pillars, tall and gray, but as they came closer, Raffi saw faint light moving through the trunks. The trees pulsed softly as if they were alive. The ground was warm under the snow, and strange vines grew between the roots. Mira said the forest was filled with nanotech, small machines that had fused with the plants over time. They set up camp near the forest edge. The night was silent except for a distant hum that seemed to come from deep within the woods. Lena stayed awake reading the old symbols on her tablet, trying to match them with the message they had received. Raffi walked alone near the trees, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the glowing branches. He felt the same pull he had felt when he first saw the message. The next morning, when the sun rose weak and cold, Nilo came running from the tree line. He said he saw something moving between the trunks. Raffi and Lena followed him to the spot, but there was nothing there. Only snow and light. Then Raffi noticed tracks on the ground. They were shaped like claws, but made of clean cuts, as if something metallic had walked there. Mira scanned the tracks and said the metal was not from any known machine. It was ancient alloy mixed with unknown materials. The forest, she said, might be alive in more ways than one. Raffi touched the mark in the snow. It was smooth, perfect, and deep. Whatever had made it had moved with purpose. That evening, as they sat around a small heater, Lena asked what Raffi truly hoped to find. He answered softly that he did not know. He only knew that the message had called to him. Lena looked at him for a long time, then said she believed the forest might remember the people who once built it. Maybe the tomb was not just a place of death, but a key to something old that still waited to wake. Raffi nodded. The sound of the wind filled the silence again. The blue suns were low, and the forest glowed faintly like a sea of quiet fire. Far away among the trees, a single pair of glowing eyes watched their camp. They were bright and calm, not hostile as if studying them. None of the group saw the eyes that night, but the feeling of being watched never left. Raffi felt it in his chest, a slow beat of warning and wonder. He knew the real journey was only beginning. The message from the north was not a mistake. It was an invitation, and somewhere beyond the glowing forest, the tomb of the Wolf King waited, hidden beneath ice and time, waiting for the ones brave enough to find it. The morning came quiet and gray. Snow fell in slow flakes that looked like dust from broken stars. Raffi stood beside the rover, watching the forest in front of him. The trees seemed taller than the towers of the colony, and their trunks shimmered faintly as if light moved inside them. It was a strange and beautiful sight. Mira adjusted her scanner and said the forest was alive with energy. The roots carried weak electrical currents, and the air was full of static. She explained that the forest must have grown over a field of old nanotech. The machines under the ground had fused with the plants and given them new life. Raffi listened carefully but said little. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadows that moved between the glowing trunks. Lena came up beside him with her tablet. She had spent most of the night studying the message again. She told him that one of the symbols in the code meant breath or life. Another meant gate or passage. Together they could mean a living gate. She thought the message was not just a call but also a map. Raffi asked her how she knew that, and she said the pattern of the symbols matched the rhythm of the forest pulses. Nilo checked his rifle and said the forest was too quiet. He was used to hunting animals in the southern plains, but here he heard no birds, no insects, and no movement except for the wind. He said it was like walking into a place where time had stopped. Raffi agreed. There was a strange stillness that made even the sound of breathing feel loud. They entered the forest slowly. Each step left a faint print on the glowing ground. The air smelled of metal and wet leaves. As they walked, the light around them changed color, shifting from pale blue to silver. The trunks of the trees were smooth like glass, and inside some of them they could see shapes moving slowly, as if something was growing inside. Mira stopped often to collect data. She said the trees might be storing information like living memory banks. The idea made Lena curious, but it made Nilo uneasy. He said he did not like the thought of trees watching them. Rafi only smiled and told him to keep moving. As they went deeper, the light from the suns above grew dim. The forest seemed to close around them. The sound of the wind faded until only their footsteps remained. Then Rafi began to hear a faint hum, like the echo of distant machinery. It came and went, never too loud, but always there. When they stopped to rest, Lena pointed to a large root covered in old symbols. They looked like the same markings from the message. She brushed away the frost and found a pattern that matched the coordinates she had decoded earlier. She said it could lead to the next point of the map. Rafi marked the spot and decided they would follow that direction after a short rest. Mira set up a small heater, and Nilo prepared food packs. They sat around the light, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. The silence pressed on them like a weight. Lena said she felt as if the forest was breathing slowly around them. Mira nodded and said the scanner showed faint movements underground like a pulse. That night they took turns keeping watch. Rafi's turn came after midnight. The air was colder, and the forest glowed faintly in the dark. He stood with his rifle near the edge of the camp and listened. For a long time there was only silence. Then he saw movement between the trees. Something large moved across the snow, almost silent. It had the shape of a wolf, but its body shone with silver light. Its eyes were bright and calm, not wild. It looked at Rafi for a moment, then vanished into the mist. Rafi walked to the spot where it had stood, but there was nothing except strange marks in the snow shaped like claws made of metal. When morning came, he told the others. Nilo thought it was a trick of the light, but Mira said it could be one of the guardians mentioned in the legend. The machines of the Wolf King might still exist, hidden in the forest. Lena looked thoughtful and said that if the machine still worked after all these years, it meant the tomb's power source was still active somewhere underground. They followed the direction of the symbol on the route. The forest began to change. The trees grew thicker and the light dimmed even more. They found small openings in the ground that led into dark tunnels, but none were large enough to enter. Mira said the energy readings were stronger there. Rafi decided they were getting close to something important. By afternoon, they reached a wide clearing. At the center stood a tall pillar of black stone covered in frost. It was not natural. The surface was smooth and carved with the same wolf symbols they had seen before. Around the pillar were small machines half buried in the soil. They looked like mechanical wolves lying still, their bodies rusted but intact. Lena touched the pillar and said it was warm. She placed her tablet on it, and lines of light spread across the surface. The tablet screen filled with data she could not understand. Mira said the pillar was a transmitter, still sending a weak signal. The signal pointed deeper north, beyond the range of their maps. While they studied the pillar, Nilo noticed something moving at the edge of the clearing. He raised his rifle but did not fire. 3 shapes stepped out from the trees. They looked like wolves made of steel and ice. Their eyes glowed blue and their bodies moved smoothly like living creatures. The team froze in silence. The wolves stopped a few meters away and watched them. None of them made a sound. Rafi felt fear rise in his chest, but also awe. These were not wild beasts. They were machines, yet they breathed, and steam rose from their sides as if they were alive. One of the wolves took a step forward. Mira held up her scanner, but it flickered and died. The wolf stopped and tilted its head, studying her. Then it made a sound, low and rhythmic, like a pulse of static. Lena whispered that it was speaking in old signal code. She recorded the sound and tried to decode it. After a few seconds, her screen displayed a simple message. It said, "Follow." The wolves turned and began to walk north. They did not look back. Rafi hesitated. It could be a trap, but something told him they were being guided. He looked at Lena and she nodded. They packed their gear and followed at a safe distance. The wolves moved gracefully through the forest, their paws leaving perfect prints in the glowing soil. The trees opened before them as if recognizing their presence. The path they followed led downhill into a valley filled with mist. When they reached the bottom, the wolves stopped near a lake frozen under a thin layer of ice. The surface reflected the faint light of the forest like glass. At the center of the lake stood another structure, a dome half buried in ice. It was massive and made of black metal. Symbols of wolves and stars were carved along its edges. The wolves walked to the edge of the lake and looked back at the humans. Then they stood still, their eyes fading until they looked like statues. Rafi understood that this was the place they had been meant to find. Mira scanned the dome and said it was sealed by some kind of energy field. The material was not from any known alloy. It was ancient, but it still hummed with power. She said it could only open by a specific signal or code. Lena checked the symbols and found one that matched the tone from the first message they had received. They decided to camp near the lake and rest before trying to open the dome. The air around the lake was warm and the mist rose in slow spirals. It was peaceful but also strange. Rafi sat beside the frozen water and thought about the wolves. He wondered if they were guarding the place or welcoming visitors. That night he dreamed of the Wolf King. He saw a tall figure in dark armor standing in a hall of light. Behind him were thousands of wolves made of metal and energy. The figure raised his hand and pointed north, where a gate of fire waited. Rafi woke with a start, his heart pounding. He looked around. The camp was quiet. The others were sleeping. The wolves by the lake still stood unmoving like statues. The forest around them pulsed faintly, glowing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Rafi realized the forest was alive not only with energy, but with memory. Every tree, every root, every machine remembered something from the past. He felt both small and honored to be there. He did not know what waited inside the dome, but he knew the message had led them for a reason. The forest was breathing around them, slow and steady, as if waiting for them to take the next step. When the first light of dawn touched the frozen lake, Rafi stood and looked north again. The path ahead was hidden by mist, but the pull in his chest grew stronger. He knew the journey was far from over. The forest had shown them the way, and now they had to face whatever waited beyond the gate of the Wolf King. The air inside the tomb was thick and heavy with energy. The light from the floor moved in steady waves, leading down into a deep corridor below the throne. Rafi stood still for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. Around him, the metallic wolves stood in perfect lines, their eyes glowing softly like blue flames. Mira held her scanner tightly, watching the readings climb higher than anything she had ever seen. The machines were not just active. They were fully awake. The tomb's systems were alive again after centuries of silence. She whispered that they must be careful. One wrong move could trigger a defense protocol. Lena looked around, her eyes full of awe. She said that this was the heart of the legend. The Wolf King had not simply died. He had built a world of machines that waited for his return. His tomb was more like a sleeping city. Every wall, every light, and every wolf seemed to be a part of one great living structure. Rafi took a deep breath and said they should go down the new path. The light from the floor was a guide, not a threat. He believed the tomb was testing them, not attacking them. Nilo hesitated but nodded. They had come too far to stop now. The team began walking down the glowing passage. The walls were covered with carving, showing scenes of unity between humans and machines. They saw people working side by side with mechanical wolves, building cities under the stars. Lena said it looked like the Wolf King's dream of a world where machines protected life, not destroyed it. As they moved deeper, the sound of machinery grew louder. It was a rhythmic hum, steady and calm like a heartbeat. The tunnel led to another large chamber, this one round and lined with crystal pillars that reached to the ceiling. In the center stood a large circular platform surrounded by smaller machines that floated slowly in the air. Mira looked at them with amazement. They were drones, but unlike any she had seen. Their bodies were smooth, made of a material that seemed to bend light. They moved in graceful patterns, scanning the walls and the humans who had entered. Suddenly, a deep voice filled the chamber. It came from everywhere at once, calm but powerful. It said, "Children of Earth, you have come where few have walked. The king sleeps until proof of worth is given." Rafi looked around but saw no speaker. The voice came through the air itself, carried by the systems of the tomb. Lena asked what kind of proof was required. The voice answered, "Show that you build, not destroy. Show that you unite, not divide." A section of the floor opened, revealing 3 glowing symbols. One showed a hand, another showed a wolf, and the third showed a star. Lena studied them for a moment and said they represented the bond between humanity, machine, and the universe. She believed they had to activate the symbols in the correct order to pass the test. Mira examined the symbols and found small panels under each one. They were touch-sensitive and linked to energy conduits. If they made a wrong choice, it could trigger a trap. Rafi told everyone to think carefully. Lena said the legend always spoke of the Wolf King as a protector who guided humans when they were lost. That meant the wolf came after the hand as it represented trust. And the star came last, meaning hope or unity, Rafi agreed. He placed his hand on the first symbol, the hand of man. It glowed bright white. Lena pressed the second, the wolf. It lit up blue, sending light across the walls. Then Mira pressed the star. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room filled with a deep vibration, and the light from all three symbols merged into one beam that rose through the ceiling. The voice spoke again, saying, "The bond is remembered." The floor shook as the platform in the center opened, revealing a long staircase made of crystal. The light below was soft and golden. The air that came from the opening felt warm, not cold. They began to descend slowly. The staircase led to another chamber, larger than all the rest. The walls were smooth, and in the middle stood a crystal sphere floating above a pool of glowing water. Inside the sphere was a faint figure, sitting on a throne of light. Rafi realized it was the core of the tomb. The figure inside the sphere was the Wolf King himself, or at least his preserved body. The armor looked the same as the one on the throne above, but here it was surrounded by streams of energy flowing in and out like veins. The wolves that had followed them now appeared again, walking down the stairs behind them. Their movements were silent, graceful, and full of purpose. They surrounded the sphere but did not attack. Instead, they knelt, lowering their heads. The voice returned, softer now, almost human. It said, "The king watches. Speak your truth." Rafi stepped forward. He said they came not to take power or treasures, but to understand. Humanity had grown again among the stars, but it still carried the same fears and hopes. He said they wanted to remember the lessons of the past, not repeat the mistakes that had once led to war. The light inside the sphere brightened. The Wolf King's eyes opened, glowing gold. His voice spoke directly to them, calm but filled with strength. He said, "Long ago humanity built machines to survive. They gave them thought, heart, and loyalty. But fear turned brother against brother. The bond was broken. I sealed my warriors in this place to wait until humans learned again to stand as one." Lena stepped closer and said that humans were rebuilding. She told him about the colonies, the new worlds, and the efforts to bring peace between scattered groups. The king listened in silence. Mira connected her tablet to the nearest console and projected data showing how humans were trying to restore harmony after centuries of struggle. The Wolf King watched the images with steady eyes. The light around him changed from gold to soft white. He said, "I see hope again. You walk the path of unity. But the world beyond these walls is not yet safe." Before Rafi could answer, the chamber shook. The lights flickered, and alarms began to echo through the walls. Mira checked her scanner and shouted that someone else had entered the tomb. Another signal was moving through the upper chambers. The king's voice grew firm. "Intruders seek what they do not understand. You must face them, for they will test your truth." The wolves around the sphere raised their heads, their eyes burning bright again. The Wolf King lifted one hand, and the wolves formed a line near the exit, ready to defend. He looked at Rafi and said, "You are the voice of your kind here. Prove that you stand for life." Rafi nodded. He understood that the king could not leave his chamber. The tomb itself would protect him, but it was up to Rafi and his team to stop whoever had entered. He told Lena, Mira, and Nilo to get ready. They moved quickly back up the crystal stairs. The tunnels above were shaking as they reached the Hall of Mirrors. The once silent machines were awake, their eyes glowing red now instead of blue. Mira said the intruders had triggered the defense systems. They could hear distant sounds of explosions and metal clashing against metal. As they ran toward the entrance, they saw shadows moving between the pillars. It was a group of armed explorers, their suits marked with the symbol of a rival colony. Their leader, a tall man named Dre, stood near the gate. He was known in the colonies as a scavenger who sought old weapons and lost technology. Dre pointed at the glowing hall and shouted that the tomb belonged to no one. He said its power would help his people rise above all others. Rafi tried to reason with him, saying the tomb was not a weapon but a memory of unity. Dre refused to listen and ordered his team to open the main control panel. Mira warned that the system could not handle a forced entry. If they damaged the core, the tomb could collapse. But Dre ignored her. He pulled a control unit from his belt and started overriding the system. Sparks flew from the walls and the machines around the hall roared to life. The metallic wolves that guarded the tomb charged forward. Their blue eyes turned white as they formed a barrier between Rafi's team and Dre's group. The ground shook under their steps. The two sides clashed as light filled the hall. Rafi and his team tried to shut down the override manually. Mira connected her tablet to the nearest control node, her fingers moving quickly. Lena helped her by reading the old symbols, guiding her through the ancient code. Nilo kept watch, trying to protect them from the chaos. As the fight grew louder, a sudden beam of light shot down from the ceiling. It spread across the floor, freezing every moving machine in place. The voice of the Wolf King echoed again, calm and commanding. "Enough!" The light turned soft and all the wolves lowered their heads. Dre's team dropped their weapons, stunned by the force of the command. The king's voice filled the air once more, saying, "Those who seek power shall find none here. Those who seek understanding shall walk free." Rafi stepped forward, his face calm but serious. He told Dre that the age of kings was over, and that humanity's strength came from unity, not control. Dre looked around, seeing the power of the tomb, and lowered his head. The Wolf King's voice grew gentle. "The worthy have spoken. The forest will remember." The lights dimmed again and the floor beneath them began to close. The wolves stepped back into the shadows, returning to their rest. The tomb was sealing itself, protecting its secret once more. Rafi and his team stood together, breathing heavily but proud. They had passed the test. The Wolf King's voice echoed one last time, saying, "Take with you the light of truth. Guard it well." The path behind them opened, leading back toward the surface. As they walked upward, the glow of the tomb faded slowly, leaving only silence behind. They emerged once again into the forest. The sky above was clear, and the twin suns shone brightly over the frozen land. The wolves that had first guided them stood at the edge of the trees, watching quietly. Their eyes glowed soft blue before they vanished into the mist. Rafi looked north, knowing the journey was not over. The tomb had tested them and found them worthy, but it had also given them a message. Humanity's strength was not in machines or power, but in unity and respect for what was created before them. He turned to Lena, Mira, and Nilo. Together they walked back toward the plains, leaving behind the sleeping tomb and the ancient king, who watched from the shadows of the forest. The light turned soft and all the wolves lowered their heads. Dre's team dropped their weapons, stunned by the force of the command. The king's voice filled the air once more, saying, "Those who seek power shall find none here. Those who seek understanding shall walk free." Rafi stepped forward, his face calm but serious. He told Dre that the age of kings was over, and that humanity's strength came from unity, not control. Dre looked around, seeing the power of the tomb, and lowered his head. The Wolf King's voice grew gentle. "The worthy have spoken. The forest will remember." The lights dimmed again and the floor beneath them began to close. The wolves stepped back into the shadows, returning to their rest. The tomb was sealing itself, protecting its secret once more. Rafi and his team stood together, breathing heavily but proud. They had passed the test. The Wolf King's voice echoed one last time, saying, "Take with you the light of truth. Guard it well." The path behind them opened, leading back toward the surface. As they walked upward, the glow of the tomb faded slowly, leaving only silence behind. They emerged once again into the forest. The sky above was clear, and the twin suns shone brightly over the frozen land. The wolves that had first guided them stood at the edge of the trees, watching quietly. Their eyes glowed soft blue before they vanished into the mist. Rafi looked north, knowing the journey was not over. The tomb had tested them and found them worthy, but it had also given them a message. Humanity's strength was not in machines or power, but in unity and respect for what was created before them. He turned to Lena, Mira, and Nilo. Together they walked back toward the plains, leaving behind the sleeping tomb and the ancient king, who watched from the shadows of the forest. The wind in the northern forests was calm once more. The storm that had followed them from the tomb had passed, leaving the land quiet under the twin suns. Rafi, Lena, Mira, and Nilo walked together through the tall frozen trees, their minds full of everything they had seen. The image of the Wolf King's glowing eyes stayed with them like a memory that refused to fade. For a long time they did not speak. The snow cracked softly under their boots. The silence around them felt peaceful yet full of power. The tomb behind them had gone quiet, buried again under the frost and light of the northern winds. Rafi looked back once and saw a faint glow through the trees, as if the tomb was watching them leave. Lena was the first to speak. She said the king had not just given them a warning. He had given them a task. His final words, "Guard the light of truth," were not only about the tomb but about the path ahead. Humanity still had to learn how to live with its creations. Mira nodded. She said that what they found could change how every colony thought about the past. The story of the Wolf King was no longer a myth. It was real, and it showed that humans and machines could build together. The tomb's memory crystals had recorded everything they had seen. She carried the data safely stored in her scanner. Nilo smiled softly and said he never thought he would survive such a journey. He looked up at the sky where the clouds were breaking apart and said the stars looked brighter now. When they reached the edge of the forest, their ship stood waiting, half covered in snow. Its metal surface reflected the golden light of the suns. Rafi placed his hand on the hull, feeling the cold metal under his palm. It felt strange to touch something built by human hands after being surrounded by the ancient machines of the tomb. They climbed aboard. Mira started the engines while Lena entered the coordinates for their home base. The systems came alive with a soft hum, and the ship rose slowly from the ground. The forest below began to fade, replaced by the white plains stretching to the horizon. As they rose higher, Rafi looked out the window and saw something that made him stop. In the snow below, a new shape was forming. The melting frost revealed a massive symbol carved into the ground, glowing faintly with blue light. It was the same symbol they had seen inside the tomb, the one that joined the hand, the wolf, and the star. Lena saw it too and whispered that the king had marked the world again. It was his way of showing that the bond was alive. Rafi nodded. He said the message was clear. The tomb was no longer just a resting place. It was a reminder that the past still guided the present. Their ship left the planet's surface and climbed into orbit. From above, the northern forest looked like a white ocean, endless and silent. The symbol of the Wolf King glowed faintly on the land, visible even from space. Back on the ship, Mira worked to transmit their findings to the Central Colony Network. She wanted to make sure the data was shared before anything could happen to them. She sent a message marked urgent, explaining everything they had found. The tomb, the technology, and the king's message of unity. But when she tried to send the final file, the system froze. A new signal appeared on their scanners coming from deep space. It was strong and pulsing like a heartbeat. Rafi frowned and asked if it was from another ship. Mira shook her head. It was coming from far beyond the colonies, from a region of space that had been silent for centuries. The signal carried a pattern. 3 tones repeating again and again. Lena's eyes widened as she recognized it. It was the same rhythm the Wolf King's machines used in the tomb when they had awakened. Mira decoded the message and displayed it on the main screen. The translation was simple and clear. It said, "The stars remember." Nilo stared at the screen, confused. He asked if the Wolf King's systems could still send signals across space. Mira said it was impossible under normal conditions, but the tomb's energy field had been unlike anything they had ever seen. It was possible that when they reactivated it, it connected to other ancient systems spread across the galaxy. Rafi stood silently for a moment, then said that the king's dream might have never been limited to one planet. Maybe the tomb was part of a network built long ago to protect knowledge and guide humanity. If the signal was real, it meant other tombs or strongholds might exist waiting for someone worthy to find them. Lena smiled with quiet excitement. She said that if they could find those places, they might discover more about how the first human-machine alliance was built. The king's message could unite the colonies and end the struggles that divided them. Mira began tracing the origin of the signal. The computer displayed a map of the nearby star systems. The pulse was coming from a distant point near the edge of known space, a dark region marked only as the outer belt. No ships had gone there for decades because it was full of unstable debris and strange magnetic storms. Rafi looked at the others. He said they had a choice. They could return home and share what they found, or they could follow the signal and uncover what lay beyond. He reminded them that the Wolf King had tested them once already and trusted them to protect the truth. Maybe this was the next step, Lena agreed. She said the king's light should not fade. Mira hesitated but then smiled and said they had already come this far. Nilo laughed and said he was tired of turning back. They all looked at each other and decided together. They would follow the signal. The ship turned slowly, changing its course toward the edge of the map. The engines glowed bright as it accelerated through the stars. The rhythmic pulse grew stronger, guiding them like a beacon. It was as if the Wolf King himself was calling them forward. As the hours passed, the stars outside grew brighter, and the space around them began to shimmer with strange light. They entered a zone filled with energy waves that bent their instruments. Mira worked carefully to keep the ship stable. She said the readings were strange, almost alive. Then the stars shifted and a new object appeared on their screens. It was a massive structure floating in the darkness, shaped like a wolf's head made of stone and metal. It was larger than any station they had seen before. The signal was coming directly from it. Raffi whispered that they had found another tomb. But this one was not sleeping. Its lights were already active, glowing red and gold. The structure slowly rotated, and a beam of light extended toward their ship, scanning it from end to end. Mira tried to raise a shield, but the scan passed harmlessly through. Then the same calm voice they had heard in the northern tomb spoke through their speakers. "You carry the mark of the first tomb. The king remembers you. Will you walk again in the light of the bond?" Raffi answered without fear. He said they would, because humanity must continue what was started long ago. The voice replied, "Then enter, children of Earth. The wolf star waits." A large gate opened on the side of the massive structure, revealing a tunnel lined with golden light. Their ship moved slowly inside. The walls around them shimmered with patterns similar to those in the first tomb. Inside the chamber, thousands of metallic wolves stood in perfect rows, just like before, but these were larger and shaped differently. They seemed ready for war, but they did not move. At the far end stood a giant figure carved from black crystal, a statue of the Wolf King with his arms crossed. Behind it, a massive star map glowed on the wall. Lena gasped. The map showed not one, but 7 points of light, each linked by lines of energy. She realized each point represented another tomb or sanctuary, hidden across different star systems. The first one they had found was only the beginning. Mira recorded everything while Nilo scanned the readings. The energy in this place was calm, balanced as if waiting for someone to give a command. Raffi stepped forward and placed his hand on the base of the statue. The room filled with light again, and the Wolf King's voice returned. "You have found the second resting place of the bond. Each light must awaken before the world can be whole again. Carry the flame to the stars and let no one break it again." The light around them grew brighter. The statue's eyes glowed gold, and a small crystal sphere appeared in Raffi's hand. Inside it shimmered the same 3 symbols as before: the hand, the wolf, and the star. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat. Raffi looked at his team. He said this was their new mission. They were no longer just explorers. They were the keepers of the bond between man and machine. Lena smiled proudly, and Mira said they would find the other lights no matter how far they had to go. The voice faded, leaving them standing in the glowing hall. Outside, the stars shone brighter than ever. The pulse of the Wolf Star echoed through space, calling others who still believed in unity. Their ship turned again, heading toward the next point on the map. The journey of the Wolf King's light had begun anew, carried not by legends but by living hands ready to build the future together. And far away, deep in the silent forests of the northern world, the first tomb of the Wolf King glowed faintly under the snow, as if smiling at the stars above.